Okay, people, so in case you didn't know, the creator of Tokyo Ghoul, Sui Ishida, has been back with his newest work for a little bit now. I want to say it was May 10th, 2021, when the manga debuted with its first chapter, and it came out of nowhere and to a very pleasant surprise to a lot of us people that are big fans of Sui Ishida's work with Tokyo Ghoul and Tokyo Ghoul Re. It was like, wham! We knew he was working on something, but we didn't know when it was coming, how it was going to come, and one day, the Shonen Jump app was like, hey, you know that creator Sui Ishida that did that really amazing story called Tokyo Ghoul? He got something new for you guys. It's called Chojin X, aka Superhuman X. You might want to take a look. So it was that same day that I actually recorded my live reaction to the first chapter, just giving brief thoughts at the end of it, and ultimately I was like, it's alright. It was good for a first chapter. It didn't blow me away per se. It wasn't anything breaking, you know, oh my god, the barriers of what you can do. It was a pretty cool first chapter. However, since then, as of the recording of this video, there are currently 15 very long chapters out of this series, Chojin X, and yeah, I got quite a bit to say about it, and in particular, I want to dissect it and also say whether or not, at the very least for this start, these first 15 chapters, if it can measure up to the beginnings of Sui Ishida's previous work, Tokyo Ghoul, because that's kind of the bar, right? That's the bar that a lot of people are setting right now, like, oh my god, can Sui Ishida do it again? He did it with Tokyo Ghoul up until towards maybe the end. For the most part, it was unanimous that he was doing it with Tokyo Ghoul Re. What's gonna happen here? Is Chojin X gonna be another smash from this creator? Let's talk about it.
No matter how you move, get it done. No matter how you move, get it done. No matter how you move, get it done. No matter how you move, get it done.
Yes, people, I've been planning this for a little bit, but I just recently caught up to the latest chapter of Chojin X, chapter 15, and the reason why it took me a little bit is because these chapters, they be long. I ain't gonna lie, sometimes they be 30 pages. At the beginning, they were like 70 pages, 50 pages, like all sorts of insanity when it came to the amount of pages, and I'm not averse to reading any type of long chapters or anything like that, but it took me a little bit, and I finally got around to it. And essentially, if you don't know about Chojin X, you haven't read a single chapter, the main character, Tokyo Kurahara, is essentially a regular dude. I believe he's like 16 years old. He has a friendship with a guy named Azuma, and one thing leads to another in the very first chapter, and ultimately he is forced to take this serum that turns him into this creature known as a Chojin to stop some bad guy, so to speak, somebody that's doing some messed up stuff to him. And yeah, it kind of leads him into similar situations if you watched Tokyo Ghoul, because one of the things that I noticed off the rip with this series, Chojin X, is that it seems like Sui Ishida was having some fun with the audience. And what I mean by that is, earlier on, it felt like it was flirting with a lot of the original beats from the original Tokyo Ghoul manga in terms of like showcasing a setup of something that was very similar to something that happened with the main character of Tokyo Ghoul, Kaneki, but then ultimately going a different way. For example, the main character, Tokyo, after he becomes a Chojin, he's there sitting in his house and he's like, oh my god, I gotta eat, can I eat? And then he eats, and he eats just fine. Like, he's not like, oh my god, throwing up, opposed to what happened with Kaneki. Kaneki was like there, you know, throwing up, he couldn't hold anything down. So that was off the rip differentiating between like, okay, becoming a Chojin doesn't destroy your taste buds, and it doesn't make you like just completely destroyed in the mind like what happened when you would become a ghoul in Tokyo Ghoul. Another example was in the zoo when Tokyo was being hunted down by that snake woman. It felt like a very similar setup to what happened with Rize and Kaneki, and ultimately again it went a different direction because she's hunting him down, even giving him a countdown. I'll give you a little bit of a countdown to run. Does that ring a bell? Yeah, kind of similar. So it felt like at the very least in the beginning, Sui Ishida was playing with us like, hey, it might be like Tokyo Ghoul. It might do the same. Oh no. It's not Tokyo Ghoul. It's a little bit different. And there's also like a major subplot because another main character in this series, aside from Tokyo Kurohara, is Ellie Otto. She's a little girl that she was like in a plane ride and the plane crashed, and ultimately that's how she became a Chojin. And she kind of has an interesting story because essentially she just wants to get money in order to bring it back home, but then there's problems back at home, so she's kind of in a pickle in and of herself. And I guess she would kind of remind me of that little kid that is in Tokyo Ghoul with the camera or something like that. Kind of gives me a vibe of that character, except she's more just like adventurous and ultimately has very noble cause. That character, you never really could tell what was breaks up with him. With Ellie, she's just kind of like, yeah, she wants to get money for her family, and you see a little bit of a camaraderie and a bond being formed between her and Tokyo Kurohara. And so shortly after Tokyo Kurohara had become a Chojin, he was taken in after being rescued by Ellie Otto at the zoo from that snake woman. They take him in as a trainee just so he can understand a little bit about Chojin life to this place called Yamato Mori. It's essentially like a camp for Chojin so they can understand their powers, because opposed to, again, like Tokyo Ghoul, where it's straight up like the ghouls are looked at as, you know, criminals just for existing and they're hunted down and murdered and stuff like that. This kind of almost seems like, think of a more tamed version of that society. Maybe even you could argue a futuristic version of that society. Put Beastars, for example, where you have the herbivores and the carnivores, and they actually can coexist now. Like, think the ghouls and humans coexist now without problems, except the humans still look at the Chojin as like they're kind of sort of scared of them, because the Chojin at any given minute can bug the hell out and hurt somebody, even potentially kill them. So that's the difference in there as well with the Chojin of this series and the ghouls of Tokyo Ghouls. At Tokyo Ghoul, the ghouls, they just wanted to eat humans, they didn't give a crap. The Chojin here, they're trying to live and coexist in society with the people, but it's a little bit difficult because they, when they get emotional, can lose it and really hurt somebody. And from these first 15 chapters, I gotta say, for the most part, we've seen, interestingly enough, some character development with Tokyo, for the fact that he starts off that he's very, very dependent on his friend Azuma, and ultimately there's something weird with that guy. I'm throwing it right there, just theory time. Something is very off about Azuma, similar to a situation, again, I keep bringing it back to Tokyo Ghoul, but it is what it is. Ultimately, like how Kaneki and his relationship with Hide was, it kind of reminded me of this situation as well, with the friendship between Tokyo and Azuma, except Azuma kind of just comes off as, I don't know, like he potentially could do something messed up to Tokyo, like, because Tokyo starts off, he's very much reliant on him. He can't make up his mind about anything. He always goes with, oh well, Azuma said let's do it this way, so I'm just gonna ride with what he said. And then as the series has progressed over the last 15 chapters, he's kind of gotten over that, and he starts to make up his mind based on other scenarios. For example, like he goes to a certain point, he's talking to birds and pigeons, and he's like, hey, you know, what should I do? What do you think? Because one of the cool things that I do like about it, and I guess this is where I'm gonna start giving you guys my idea of what I'm looking at this series in comparison to how I looked at Tokyo Ghoul, is the fact that this guy, as a Chojin, he is a vulture, because when you become a Chojin, you turn into the form of something that you most want, something that you most want to be like, something that you most want. So he became a vulture. There's a dude that becomes a giant monstrous baseball looking dude, like his head becomes a baseball and he's like the ultimate baseball player. So ultimately that's something that you kind of transform into based on what you want. Like there's a dude that becomes like swords and stuff like that, because obviously he really loves swords. And that's something about this series that I really am into, opposed to like with Tokyo Ghoul, I was more so really character based. I was really into the characters. I was really into Kaneki's pain and understanding his relationship with Toka and this, that, and the third. It was really more so about the characters for me. With that one, with Chojin X, I'm more so here for, okay, this world building is pretty freaking interesting. These characters, their powers, the, you know, the Chojin themselves. Like, so right now, if I really love microphones, which I've been on a microphone for many, many years now, going back to when I was recording my raps in my room when I was like 14 years old. So would I turn into like a microphone Chojin? That would be insane. I don't want to be a microphone Chojin. I just tell you that right now. But that's something that I really appreciate about the story. And even though they introduced something like Yamato Mori, which again is like a kind of base for Chojin so that they can understand, but then there's also like squads in there, keepers, so to speak, that help out to like, in case, you know, Chojin go wild or whatever. It doesn't feel like a school setting per se, because that's something that I always am not a fan of. Like that trope has been so overused, and I'm already a little bit too old to be like, oh yeah, look at the classroom guys. Like if they do it right, fine, but in this one in particular, it doesn't really focus in on like school aspects or anything like that. And just as a series so far, I feel like almost Sui Ishida has free reign to do almost everything that he wants to do whenever he wants to do. In case you don't know, the series is released very irregularly. They're trying to catch up and they're releasing it in, you know, the physical magazines, but it is digitally released whenever Sui Ishida wants to drop a chapter. It's to his schedule. And I also feel like possibly the story itself and the creation of it probably has very minimal input from an editor. Like the series doesn't feel necessarily streamlined. There was times where I was reading chapters and I was there like, not necessarily like what the hell is going on, that I don't understand it, but it would just be so abstract, and I could tell that Ishida is doing what he wants to do. It's not the traditional story beat by beat, so it feels like unique in its own right in terms of Ishida is just having fun, and probably the editor tries to say, hey, you want to just move that character design, and he probably looks at him and say, who wrote Tokyo Ghoul? Me or you? Me or you? That's what I'd imagine, because again, it just doesn't feel very streamlined like the typical shonen series, or in general anything you would expect from these type of magazines, even if, because I want to say it's actually technically a seinen, like it doesn't really feel like the average storytelling. It feels just, again, it gets abstract. There's times where just straight up you're getting these crazy drawings, like in the beginning where Ellie is being chased by this freaking killer Chojin. It's like you just don't know what the hell to expect, which is a good and a bad thing, because again, there are times where I'm like, what? This needs a little more explanation, or this has too much explanation for me to still not understand it. What the hell is going on here? So there's a gift and a curse with it. I feel like it takes a little bit from where Ishida was at with Tokyo Ghoul Re, where there's a lot of exposition sometimes, but also it's complicated exposition. So I feel like some of that headspace from Ishida is there, but also some of the more camaraderie aspects that he had later on in the story is there as well. In terms of like, in the beginning of Tokyo Ghoul, it felt very depressing, very lonely. Looking at this character, he was all alone. He didn't have nobody. He was really going through it mentally and emotionally. And Tokyo, he immediately has this little girl, Ellie. He immediately finds these people. You know, he has a couple of, I guess, somewhat of a relationship with these keepers, because 3 other important characters in here are Simone Kagamura. He's 17. He's a keeper. I really like his design, and he also gets into a little bit of action. He's the guy that he's a sword Chojin. Then there's Momoma. She's 18 and a keeper. I don't know too much about her, but it seems as though she's very like boss-like, so to speak. She likes to be in control. And then there's the dude with one of the most greatest godlike jawlines you will ever see. It's literally just like a damn box. Think Batman the animated series, Batman's jawline. Sandek. Is he a keeper? I know he rocks with them or whatever, but I can't remember was he a keeper or not. But either way, those are 3 important characters as well. So it kind of giving that vibe of like, okay, more camaraderie than a lonely nature that you got in the beginning of Tokyo Ghoul. And so far, one of the biggest arcs that we had was the baseball star that went rogue. Essentially, there was a baseball player named Shiozaki. He was really, really good, and one day during a game, he messed up, turned into a Chojin, and sunk some dude into the ground as hard as he pitched the ball to him. Like, he just went straight into the ground. It freaking made a crater damn near from how hard he hit him with the ball. And pretty much after he became a Chojin, he couldn't accept that he could never essentially play baseball anymore, because it's not fair for a Chojin to play baseball with regular humans, and he went into a life of crime, and they gotta try and stop him, and eventually he turns into this baseball creature with a baseball for a head, and he's just completely out of control. And that battle so far was the biggest and most epic battle, where you see Tokyo, he's getting a little bit more of an understanding of his vulture Chojin powers and how it advances, him teaming up with Simone to fight. And I love how, again, Ellie, she's not necessarily annoying. Like, there's times where I'm really like, I don't really like kids to be involved in very gruesome stories, because, you know, people could die in this story. It gets a little bit deadly here. People do die in this story, but ultimately, like, she doesn't feel like, oh, that annoying little kid that, you know, has to be in there for the sake of things. Like, she actually serves a purpose. She's kind of badass at times. She does some really awesome things. She's either a good distraction, like when she jumps on Shiozaki, the baseball guy, when he's going berserk, and even though he swings her away, ultimately she is useful thanks to her Chojin powers, and she's a little bit more mature-esque, which kind of just makes it a little less annoying, like, oh, a little kid in the manga. And so far as it stands, I'll be honest with you guys, when it comes to Chojin X in comparison to its predecessor works of Tokyo Ghoul and Tokyo Ghoul Re, I don't like it as much. I'll be honest with you. It's alright, it's enjoyable. If I was to give it out of right now where it's at in terms of just enjoyability, not critically, because critically it's pretty good. It hasn't made any like major plot holes or anything like that. It's pretty damn good. But in terms of enjoyability, it's somewhere in the ballpark of like a 7 to a 7.5 out of 10. In comparison, Tokyo Ghoul was like a 9 to a 10 out of 10. But that just could be due to preference, because I was really into the dark vibe, the depressing vibe that Tokyo Ghoul started off with. This one doesn't seem as much, again, character driven. It's more so story driven and world building and stuff like that, which, hey, it's doing a pretty good job. I'm really interested in the Chojin powers. I just would like for it to get a little bit more personable with the characters. Like, it seems like it was only just recently that Tokyo himself, the main character, figured out what he wants to do, that he wants to actually help people, which is a generic goal for the most part. I mean, hey, he's a good people, and I think that could also evolve and change, because it was like a saying of like, you know, you're never too old for your dreams to change or something like that. Like, I think at a certain point his goal can change, especially depending on what happens with his longtime BFF Azuma. Like, I think that could morph things a little bit, but again, I'm not really resonating with him as much as I resonated with Kaneki, but I like the camaraderie that he has so far with these people. I like where the story is building up to. It seems like these first 15 chapters are really just getting us familiar with this world, getting us to understand a little bit about the relationship between Chojins and humans, that this is almost a more futuristic, domesticated Tokyo Ghoul, in terms of like, the ghouls don't need to eat people no more. They're looked at as, instead of ghouls, superhumans, Chojins, and they're still kind of feared, but they coexist with regular humans in society. That's how I look at it. I wouldn't be surprised. Who knows if at a given point it's like, oh yeah, this is actually like 30 years into the future of the Tokyo Ghoul world, and we eradicated the thought of ghouls, and they're now just Chojin. So I'm definitely going to keep reading. I'm definitely going to see where this goes, but it doesn't have me like by the balls, so to speak, in terms of I love this. It's like, it's pretty good. Curious what you guys think though. If you've been reading Chojin X up until this point, how do you feel about it? What do you think about the main character Tokyo? How do you feel about Ellie? Who's your favorite character so far in comparison to Tokyo Ghoul, Ishida's original work that was wildly successful, the reason most of us know who Ishida is to begin with? Where do you feel it stacks for the beginning of Ghoul compared to the beginning of Chojin X? Again, it has some things going for it. The world building is strong. The story itself, it's pretty damn good. And you got similar elements to Ghoul, except Chojin X it'll do the setup like, oh, that's kind of like Ghoul. I think I know where this is going. Oh shit, it went left. And if you have not checked out Chojin X, will you be checking it out based on my recommendation? Again, it has a lot of the elements that you like from Ishida. It has the detailed explanations, the good build up. It has some kind of cool characters, not as good as the characters from Ghoul so far, but then again, it could also be a bias of mine. Remember, I spent hundreds of chapters with the characters from Tokyo Ghoul that made me bond with them. These ones, it's been 15 chapters, and I don't feel that bond yet with any of the cast. And yeah, people, Chojin X, from May to now, 15 chapters. Let's see where this bad boy goes. Ishida, I got my eyes on you still. That's all I have for this one, though. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you liked anything I had to say or enjoyed the video, drop me a like. I'd greatly appreciate it. And if you want more from me, make sure to subscribe. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram. Hit that bell to get all notifications. And if you want to follow any of my other social media, links are in the description below. I'm ForneverWorld, and as always, people, have an awesome day. And remember the golden rule: anime and manga for life, boy! Have an awesome day. Peace in. And yeah, people, Ishida been back for a little bit. It's been a little quiet. Definitely not on the level of Tokyo Ghoul yet, but still, Chojin X has promise. So we'll see where it goes. Have an awesome one.